Going to start the recording and get started here. Just a little bit of history about the Likes Lecture Series for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It is named to honor surveyors Martin Leo Likes and his son Tom, who did a lot for New Philadelphia and Barry back in the early 2000s. The series began in 2004 as part of the Archaeology Field School, sponsored by the National Science Foundation Research Experience for Undergraduates program, and it was open to the public. 6 field sessions were conducted from 2004 to 2006, and then again from 2008 to 2011. And the lectures provided a great way to inform the public about what was going on at New Philadelphia and also give the students a chance to share their research. Until 2020, the lectures were held in person at Sprague's Kinderhook Lodge near Barry. Since then, the lectures have been on Zoom, which allows speakers and participants from all over the country. Since the beginning, they have been every Tuesday night in June at 7 o'clock. As I said, this marks our 21st year. The theme for the Likes Lecture Series this year is Roots of Resilience, Stories that Endure. And if you look at the different sessions that we're offering this year, you'll see there is a connection on that. So tonight our topic is the making of the real Huckleberry Finn with Dr. David Weinberg. Dr. Weinberg is the owner of Vox Humana Productions in Reno, Nevada. He is an actor, producer, and author. His latest book, The Merowitz Compendium, was published in America and Europe in 2021. The late Glenda Jackson, CBE, 2-time Academy Award-winning actress and longtime member of Parliament, was kind enough to write the foreword to the book. David moved to London to complete an MA at, is that just said RADA?
The Royal Academy of Dramatic Art.
Sorry, I didn't know that. In London's West End, and he debuted first as an actor in the Comedy News Hour at the Leicester Square Theatre, and most recently directed Chekhov's masterpiece, Three Sisters, upstairs at the Arts Theatre. In 2012, it was confirmed that he was the first American to direct at the historic Rose Theatre, Bankside, where the plays of Shakespeare were originally performed. He directed The Merchant of Venice and later Pericles at the beginning and end of the Rose season, the annual Rose season. His first Hang on a second. I'm going to mute everybody. Sorry. All right. His first book was published in 2017, and he's taught theater studies at Kingston University, London, and the University of London. His first film as a director was a short thriller called Rudy, Where Are You? It was a official selection of the 2024 Southern Cal Film Awards, 2024 Amsterdam Liftoff Film Festival, and the 2024 Sacramento International Film Festival, and received an honorable mention at the 2024 Influx Film Award. So you can see that he has a very studied background, and it's going to be interesting to hear all about the making of the real Huckleberry Finn. So, David, can you unmute yourself?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, well, thank you for the... Hello, everyone. Please call me Dave or David. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me and for your time. That's basically my biography. I guess when this project, I should say first off that we are in production. So as I mentioned to Kay, I really have not had time to prepare a presentation or a PowerPoint presentation or a slideshow because we are actually in production. So the film is happening in the present tense. And as such, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. But it may be that I don't have satisfactory answers at this time because the situation is currently developing. So just to say that, and also to say that I am certainly no expert on the antebellum period. I'm sure all of you know more about the antebellum period than I do. That being the situation, I guess the origin of how this project came about was when I originally read Huckleberry Finn. There was a little blurb at the beginning of the book, and it said that the real Huckleberry Finn was thought to be named Tom Blankenship, and that he had moved to the out west to the Montana Territory and become a justice of the peace. And right then and there, I thought, wow, I would be really fascinated to know what happened with the real Huckleberry Finn when he grew up and became a justice of the peace. And I thought that I would be very interested to find out, and that other people would be interested in the story. So I have a list of ideas that I have, and I kept this idea for quite a while. I lived in London until 2018, and I moved back for a few different reasons. But part of what I wanted to do is I had kind of accomplished a lot of what I wanted to do in the theater. Not everything, but a lot of what I wanted to do. And I think it's important for artists to constantly step outside of our comfort zone, to challenge ourselves, to do new things and not just repeat ourselves. And I wanted to make the transition to directing film. As Kay mentioned, the first film I directed was in November of 2023. It was a short thriller and named Rudy, Where Are You? And we were an official selection of 4 film festivals and received an honorable mention at one of them. But we really put that together very quickly in about 2 weeks' time. So this project I've really is my first feature film, and I've really been working on it in earnest since about 2 years ago in August, when I first came to meet Faye at Jim's Journey and really start to learn about Daniel Quarles, and to visit Hannibal, and to really in earnest start to study the background and all of the literature. There are the historical figures, but there are also their incarnations in literature. So there are sequels to the Huckleberry to Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, some of which were in draft form and not published, and are very interesting. For example, there's a draft of a novel that Twain didn't complete, Tom Sawyer Conspiracy, which he almost completed. It's almost done. It's in draft form. It's incomplete, but it's actually very interesting. There's also, of course, Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer Among the Indians, which he completed 9 chapters of. Then there's Tom Sawyer Abroad, which is essentially pastiche of Jules Verne, and is really Twain cashing in, and is not a terrific a piece of literature in my view. It's what's the word, derivative. And then there was a manuscript that Twain destroyed, where Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer come together as old men and talk about their lives together. So they're the actual people, and then they're literary incarnations. There's also The Prince and the Pauper. The Pauper has many characteristics of Tom Blankenship or Huckleberry Finn, and the family dynamic is very similar. So the film is essentially the story of the real people that Mark Twain based the characters on and what happened to their descendants. It's also, to a great extent, the story of Hannibal, because these were figures from Mark Twain's childhood, and he returns to this motif again and again of Hannibal, even if it's not explicitly called Hannibal. The town in The Tragedy of Puddinghead Wilson, for example, is not explicitly called Hannibal, but it's obviously Hannibal. And so he returns to this motif again and again. And so it's the story of Hannibal. It's also really about America, that it is widely accepted or thought, and Faye and I had an interesting conversation about this, that Huckleberry Finn is the quintessential American novel. That if a person from a different country wanted to know if they could understand the United States of America by reading one book, you would refer them to Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. That it is the story of this semi-feral boy who runs away from an abusive situation from so-called civilization, and he encounters Jim, who's also running away from this so-called civilization. And really the world is topsy-turvy, where you have the good father and the bad father being Pap, but the law is on the side of the bad father. The law is against the good father, being Jim. And so And the river, the Mississippi, is, of course, this mighty river that cuts right through the heart of our country. And so the idea is to consider to what extent, if it's perceived that this book is a reflection of America, to what extent is that still true? To what extent have we changed or have we not changed? And I think it's particularly important right now in our country's history. We're experiencing what might be in the future referred to as an inflection point, where there is a movement towards authoritarianism. And as I was mentioning to Kay, we're drawing the link between between Abraham Lincoln and Mark Twain's older brother, Orion Clemens, because Orion Clemens was a pro-Union Southerner. He campaigned for Lincoln in 1860. And because of this, Abraham Lincoln appointed Orion Clemens as Nevada's first Secretary of State. And I'm going to approach the former governor, who's the president of the university here, to interview him about this role. But I'm interested in Orion Clemens as an agent of Lincoln in Nevada's statehood, because, to my understanding, the reason why Lincoln wanted to fast track Nevada's statehood before we had the necessary population was because he needed to get reelected, and also because he wanted the 13th Amendment to be ratified. And so I'm interested in Twain's brother as an agent of Lincoln in that process. So we're drawing that link. So the film will have live action sequences, which are essentially in the present day. So I just made friends with Captain Steve, who's the captain of the Mark Twain riverboat, and he's invited me into the pilot's house. And so I'm going to interview him as we go around, and he points out where they believe the actual Jackson's Island has now, by this point, split into two islands. So he's going to show us that. But I'm also interested in the present day, what's going on in Hannibal in the present day. So I'm going to interview Captain Steve and ask him, I've already asked him, but on camera, what he thinks about the riverfront redevelopment and the big cruise ships that are coming through. And it's also very interesting that the economy of Hannibal is tied to Twain. And also extensively, if anyone is the star of the film, it's really Faye. I want to tell Faye's story, and not just going back generations, because to my understanding, her husband is the great-grandson of William Henry Dant, who was born in 1835, the same year as Twain, in Hannibal. And he lived to be 104 years old, and he died the year my father was born, in 1939. And then the Works Progress Administration has interviews with him, and there are other sources in the Library of Congress and elsewhere. And so I'd like to profile the people like this and free Frank McWhorter. And then we meet their living relations today and find out, have things changed? Have they not changed? How are things different? How are they the same? And to my extent, understanding, William Henry Dant was married with 3 kids when emancipation happened. So he had a vivid recollection of the slavery period. And so we will have live action sequences. We will also have animated sequences in the style of a graphic novel. And we will have sequences that are like a Ken Burns documentary with documents and photographs and vintage film. And then also music is going, I hope, to be a very important, big part of the film. And this has actually been very challenging. And some of you may be able to help me with this. Because of the anti-literacy laws, a lot of the sources of music of people from the Mississippi region, enslaved people in the 19th century, a lot of it is lost. I went to the Blues Museum in St. Louis, but to my understanding, the blues came later during the Jim Crow period. So I've been actively seeking out archives of musical sources of music by enslaved people and artwork during the 19th century and in the Mississippi River Valley. And so that is essentially a summation of the project. So I'm open to responding to any questions anyone may have or comments.
So, David, tell us who the audience for the film is going to be, or that who you envision it being.
Well, it could have an educational dynamic because, for better or worse, every year, millions, tens of millions of American kids are introduced to slavery in the antebellum period in our nation's history by way of Twain, through Twain. So there are different audiences for it. There are people who are interested in Mark Twain, who are interested in America, who are interested in documentaries, but it's also educational in nature, and I hope will be entertaining as well. But that it has the capacity to have course curriculum built on it. I hope it would air on PBS, something of that nature. There are different outlets. There's a place called the American Film Market, and this past year it was in Las Vegas, but they have lots of folks there, different parties, governments that are interested in investing in independent films. For example, I know a filmmaker and the Polish government invested in his film because it's set in Poland. In any case, there are outlets of that nature, but the trajectory for it would be probably for it to air on PBS and for there to potentially be course curriculum that is built scaffolding or course curriculum that's built around it or out of it.
I have a question.
Sure.
With Percival Everett writing James and winning the award he has for it, do you see that as worth being not worth, but mentioned in any of what you're going to be developing?
Absolutely. I've interviewed Shelley Fisher Fishkin at Stanford, and we talked about Percival Everett, and my intention is to approach him and ask him if I can interview him. He's very hot right now, so he may say no. He's too busy. But I'm hoping Shelley Fisher Fishkin might be able to help me with that and get an interview. I'd also like to interview Nancy Rawls in Seattle. I also will be interviewing Terrell Dempsey at his law office in Quincy, and that's already arranged. So absolutely. And Percival Everett also has this very deep, resonant voice. I think it would be really great. So I think that would be great if I could interview him. I'd like to interview him and as well as the others. And Shelley Fisher Fishkin just wrote this book about the character of Jim.
So before everybody joined us, we were chatting and you were telling us about the real event that happened back in 1847. That was one of the impetus of your film. So,
yes, well, where the actual story starts was the real event in August of 1847. There was an enslaved man from Howard County in Missouri, and he was able to escape and get to the Illinois side of the Mississippi River on a place called Sny Island that was in Pike County. So the same county as New Philadelphia. He was only 20 miles from New Philadelphia. And here's the source I have. This is from the Dixon Wechter, who was the head of in charge of he took over from Albert Bigelow Paine as the official executor of the literature. This is his account from a book from the early 60s. He says, let me see. Okay, I discovered the Hannibal Journal of August 19th. While some of our citizens were fishing a few days ago, since on the Sny Island, they discovered in what is called Bird Slough the body of a Negro man. On examination of the body, they found it to answer to the description of a Negro recently advertised in handbills as a runaway from Miriam Todd of Howard County. He had on a brown jeans frock jacket, homemade linen pants, and a new pair of lined and bound shoes. So I've contacted Howard County. I'm trying to find out what this man's name was, and I'm going to contact Professor Ward at Washington University, so we know what the man was wearing and who he ran away from and where he came from, and he was encountered. So he escaped to Sny Island, where he was encountered by Benson Blankenship. Benson Blankenship was the older brother of Tom Blankenship, who Mark Twain claims was the model for Huckleberry Finn. And Benson Blankenship's his lifestyle consisted essentially of drinking alcohol and fishing. That's about all he did, to my understanding. But he gave this man aid, despite the potential consequences. And Twain, or Sam Clemens, learned about this, what happened. Samuel Clemens would have been 11 years old at the time. And it was also the same year that Samuel Clemens' father died. So that was the actual event, what actually took place. And so if anyone has any suggestions as to how I think I'll have to go to Howard County and go through county records and go into whatever archives exist. So that's a summation of it.
So Joe Conover had the question, tell us more about the relationship between Blankenship and Huck Finn. Did David answer your question, Joe?
Well, so the Blankenships essentially lived in a converted barn that was connected to the Clemens house, and they were really salt of the earth. And so you had Woodson Blankenship was the father, was the model for the real pap. There was Mahala Blankenship, the mother. There is a depiction of a mother figure in Prince and the Pauper. And then you had the twins. We had Tom Blank. There's a census from 1850 that has the family outlined. And so there was Tom Blankenship, and then Benson Blankenship was the older brother who the actual incident took place. Now, I had quite an experience on Sunday. The last living record we have of Tom Blankenship alive was from 1861. He spent the winter of 1861 in the county jail in Palmyra, the county seat. He was caught stealing turkeys. And this may have been deliberate because he had to steal food to survive. And so if it's winter, if you go to jail, at least they feed you and you have a warm place to sleep. So he may have intentionally gone to jail. But I decided to drive out to Palmyra this Sunday. And as I was driving to Palmyra, I saw the sign for Bay Island. And Bay Island was the area where Tom Blankenship was actually caught stealing the turkeys. And so I decided to drive to Bay Island. And as I was driving there, an actual live wild turkey ran across the road right in front of me. I've never seen that before in my life. So that was a new experience for me. And so then I drove to Palmyra. But that's the last record we have of Tom Blankenship alive, when he was 30 years old. And then we find out in 1899, 38 years later, his younger sister, Elizabeth Blankenship, told a reporter from Harper's Weekly magazine that he was dead. So he would have been 68. So we know that he didn't live to be 68. Now, as to what Twain said in 1906, he made this comment that I heard 4 years ago that Blankenship moved out west to the Montana Territory and became Justice of the Peace. Personally, I think Twain was telling a fib. I think he was spinning a yarn because, first of all, he's contradicting what the man's own sister said. His sister said in 1899 that he was dead. Also, on the court records in 1861, the name Blankenship is misspelled. There's an A where there should be an E in Blankenship, and he was already known to be illiterate. So was that a clerical error, or was he still illiterate at the age of 30, as he was already known to be, to the point where he could not spell his own last name? Now, how do you go from that to being a justice of the peace, which requires you to be fully literate? It seems implausible to me that he would go from, at the age of 30, being illiterate to the point where he can't spell his last name to being a justice of the peace and somehow getting out to Montana. I think that may have been what Twain envisioned for the character of Huckleberry Finn. But as for the actual man, the human being, Tom Blankenship, it seems very implausible to me that somehow he would learn to read and make his way out to Montana and be elected justice of the peace. It seems implausible.
So, David, we had a question in the chat from Bob Silbert. What about the novel Huck Finn Aloft? Are you familiar with?
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm
Okay.
not familiar with that. That's another author who there was an author who tried to finish Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer Among the Indians. So there are a few sequels to Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and there's Tom Sawyer Abroad, which is derivative of Jules Verne and is not is an inferior work in my estimation and in others people's view. But there's also sequels that he didn't quite complete. He wrote the first 9 chapters of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer Among the Indians. There's also a draft, as I was mentioning to Kay, of a novel called Tom Sawyer Conspiracy, which was actually really interesting, where Tom Sawyer, excuse me, he comes up with this scheme to dress himself as an African American to then sell himself into slavery, where he then escapes from slavery and joins the search to find himself. And so it's funny and it's interesting, and he almost finished it. And so I want to discuss these, not only the real human beings that the characters were based on, but also their incarnations in literature. Some of the novels, like Prince and the Pauper is named Tom Canty, and the family and the living environment is very similar. Or the speculation is that the description of their living conditions, how they lived on really piles of straw. They would sleep on piles of straw and a dilapidated converted barn where people would write obscenities on the wall and this sort of thing. Seems to be potentially compatible with what Twain may have experienced in the Blankenship household. So Tom Blankenship was actually 4 years older than Twain, and they would actually sneak out at night as teenagers and get up to mischief with their band of friends. So they had these kind of calls, and they would go out. And there's also a description of an African American boy who would run around with them, and his name is quote unquote Black John. That's in 1930 there was a man who wrote a piece in the Palmyra Gazette that his grandmother was the owner of this enslaved boy, referred to as Black John. And then he says they ran around with Tom Blankenship and Sam Clemens, and that they were natural born leaders. And so in the animated sequences will be based on the descriptions of the true events of the actual event of what happened with the real man who ran away, and with this band of teenagers, adolescent boys, and the mischief that they got up to. That will be animated in this style of a graphic novel. And also their literary incarnations will be animated in the same way. But I don't know if I'm answering questions.
Well, Bob, would you like to share what you're interested in knowing about the book Huck Finn Aloft? You might.
He might be muted.
Well, he might be muted, but
I'll read it. Huck Finn Aloft. Interesting.
Well, while we're waiting.
Okay.
Oh, there you are.
That's a book that I read many years ago. It's another Twain.
Who is the author?
I think it was Twain.
Really? I thought I'd covered all of his Huck Finn related material. I'll look into that.
Cool.
He stows away in a hot air balloon and ends up going around the world, having all kinds of.
Oh, that's Tom Sawyer Abroad.
That's Abroad.
Yeah, Tom Sawyer Abroad is essentially Twain is doing pastiche of Jules Verne's story, 5 Weeks in a Balloon. And then Twain sprinkles in a bit of Arabian Nights and some other stories. He wrote Tom Sawyer Abroad in 10 days, And as I said, I had this interesting conversation with Faye on Sunday that Faye, I was describing how his work is so lionized. And I got the impression from Faye, she feels he's a bit overrated. And in some ways, I think that's true. I think Twain, he repeats himself. In a lot of cases, he's simply cashing in, such as in the case of Tom Sawyer Abroad. He's clearly, if you were to say to Mark Twain that he was an artist, he would be insulted by that. He thought of that as something very silly and pretentious. He thought of himself as a professional writer. He wrote for money. And so sometimes he's doing exactly that. And the work is superficial and derivative. Also, at that time, they had this idea that because books at that time are an expensive commodity, if you're going to invest in this expensive commodity, you want it to be substantial and impressive to whoever you're trying to impress by displaying the books. And so they actually thought it was valuable to overwrite and write more just so the book would have more words and more pages and be heavier. And so that creates problems.
So Charlotte's asking in the chat, what's your opinion of the novel James by Percival Everett?
I think it's really fascinating. I love it. I think it's great. And I think it's very insightful and it's very necessary. And Faye was telling me about a class where they actually teach James in conjunction with Huckleberry Finn. So they study both books. And I think that's excellent. Yes, I think it's a great idea. So I find it very fascinating. I thought he tweaked some of the references so that they were compatible for a modern audience. He talks about sort of things that are antiquated, like corn pone, people eating corn pone, and he describes it in a way that modern readers would understand it. And so it's geared towards present day readers, I would say.
So does anybody else have a question? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. No, I see that. Oh,
I do.
Good.
How about Daniel Quarles?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you tell us about him a little bit?
Well, Daniel Quarles lived on the Quarles farm, so Twain's uncle's farm in Florida, Missouri. And I have the contact information for Karen Hunt, who's the current owner of what was Twain's uncle's farm. So he was an enslaved man, and his daughter, Mary, was a childhood companion of Twain. She was 6 years older, and there's a picture of her in the Bancroft Library at Cal. So apparently Daniel Quarles, a lot of the sources we've been using are from the official biography by Albert Bigelow Paine, because it was published in 1913. It's in the public domain. It's also very high quality material. The way he's depicted in that is that he had lockjaw, Daniel Quarles, and that he was a good storyteller and really a father figure, a man with good sense and natural intelligence. And I think the book is really, it's important to point out that Huck's conversion, the way he changes his mind or his attitude towards African Americans is not really the same as Twain. But being around people like Daniel Quarles, I think, helped this conversion in Twain himself at some point, where he started to regard Black people as human beings and not as a farm animal or something less than human. And I think Daniel Quarles, knowing people like that, and Black John, and there were other folks. There was when Twain was 15, he had a friend who used to give sermons from a woodpile, an African-American enslaved boy. And Mark Twain describes him as the Jerry. He describes him in the manuscript as the greatest. He thought he was the greatest man in the United States of America. In the published version of the anecdote, he changes man to orator. He says he thought that he was the greatest orator in the United States of America. But he also had a very high opinion of this individual. And there were other events, I think, that helped to sensitize Twain. So Daniel Quarles, like the Blankenships, were figures from Twain's childhood. And it was, I guess, it was a source for him. There's also a character in the Gilded Age that's clearly based on Daniel Quarles. He's actually called Uncle Daniel, just as Daniel Quarles was referred to. So I think Daniel Quarles was a person that impressed Twain, that contradicted the canards and attitudes of the time about black people. And I think knowing Daniel Quarles and others helped to humanize African Americans for Twain. That's what I believe.
And is it Daniel Quarles' daughter that ended up married to William somebody or other over in Springfield, and William was hung in the 1908 riot? Are you up on that story? Faye's told me before, and I may not have the right names of the people, but there is a direct tie-in with these stories, and one of the people that was lynched in the 1908 riot over in Springfield. And I'm thinking
that was the basis.
Go ahead.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
check
that
out. Check it out with Faye. She's got a picture on the wall of the
right.
woman.
I think it might have been Scott Burton's wife that was related to Daniel Quarles, but I'm not sure.
Okay. My understanding is that's the riot that led to the formation of the NAACP in Union Station in Springfield. Well, we're going to be going to Springfield, and I want to film in the Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, but also that Union Station where the event took place. And that I should read up on that. My understanding, or find out more. My understanding is that Daniel Quarles' son was named Harv Quarles, and his daughter was Mary Quarles, and he has living descendants. There's Larry McCarty, who lives in Texas, and to my understanding, he was reunited with a cousin of his named Fabian Hedge Hodge, and the family had been separated for 150 years by slavery, and that she, to my understanding, is a resident of, or was a resident of, Davenport, Iowa. But as for the generations between, I need to learn a lot more. I didn't know that about the riot of 1908 and a participant being a relations of Daniel Quarles. I wasn't aware of that. So thank you for telling me.
No problem.
So, anybody else have any questions? There, Eileen, you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I was wondering if you could speak a little more of where the Blankenships lived in relationship to the Twain home. And I thought you said they lived in a building attached or semi-attached to the Twain home. I've been for a book that I'm working on, trying to determine where the Blankenships lived at different times.
Yeah. Well, the photograph we have is the building is not there anymore, but there is a photograph from the early 20th century and I've seen depictions, artistic depictions. My understanding is there's Samuel Clemens's father's house, and then they have the fenced off area, and then on the corner there was essentially a converted barn that the Blankenships lived in. That's my understanding, but you may know more about it than I do. But that's my understanding.
I have seen the photograph that you're speaking of, and my understanding is that that photograph of that building was taken, about the turn of the century, and that the building had been much added on to. I was trying to reconstruct what the original building, just in my head, what the original building looked like, which would have been much smaller. And it clearly had been added into making it a living space. And Gary Schornhorst mentioned something too about his idea of where the Blankenships lived at various times, because apparently they moved around. They'd get thrown out of one place and they'd go someplace else, and they would kind of camp out by the river when they were between places to live, was the impression I got. But nobody really knows, so I'm just trying to narrow down on as many facts as I can.
Well, my understanding is that Woodson Blankenship was from South Carolina originally, and the structure that is there now, I guess that was built in 2006, seems very strange to me. I don't know what that's based on. It doesn't seem to resemble the photograph. To a certain extent, it might not be possible to identify things with total precision. In The Prince and the Pauper, there's a chapter where the king, the new king, is confused for the pauper, Tom Canty, and he's taken to this deserted, converted barn by the abusive father, and there are a bunch of ne'er-do-wells there, crooks and prostitutes and people of that sort. And the depiction of the barn or that space is potentially similar to what the Blankenship household would have been like, or that's the speculation. Also, Roxy in The Tragedy of Puddinghead Wilson, the depictions of her living quarters are thought to be similar or compatible, or have been influenced by Twain's experience of being in the Blankenship house. Also in Huckleberry Finn, when the house goes floating by, the way that's described with profanities written on the wall and miscellaneous junk, and you've got Huckleberry Finn's father, Pat Blankenship, is there dead on the floor. And so those conditions, that would have been experiencing the Blankenship house with the language and such, would have been a real revelation for a young Samuel Clemens. They also had he had a Blankenship. Tom Blankenship had a sister who was around the same age, or may have been his twin. And so I don't know if this teenage Sam Clemens would have been curious about his female siblings, but that's what I know about. There was an article in the Mark Twain Journal I have it. I can share it with you. I think it was 2013. And it talks about the Blankenship family. So that's kind of summation of what I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you. Yes, I think I've got a copy of the journal thing too. Thank you very much.
Of course, thank you. By the way, I teach at Turning Point, and I had this revelation that I realized that if Huckleberry Finn were alive today, he could be one of my students. I looked at one of my students, and he's semi-feral, and he has abusive parentage, and he curses a blue streak. And I thought, there you are. You're the real Huckleberry Finn. You're right here in front of me.
So real quickly, what is Turning Point?
It's a school. There are schools there are other turning points throughout the country, but it's a school for kids. Really, the common denominator is they've experienced trauma, so they have profound behavioral difficulties, and it's been a meaningful experience for me. A lot of them don't have really positive male role models, or they're in foster care, and so in any case, I've been working on this project, and at some point, I turned and looked at my student. I realized he's the real Huckleberry Finn.
Okay, in the chat, when you were talking about trying to track down the gentleman from Howard County, Claire suggested that you check runaway slave ads from the time period. You want to chime in there, Claire?
Yeah, even though I think Howard County is kind of rural, but they might have put ads out in even as far down as St. Louis, because sometimes people ran for St. Louis. And the description that you were giving of his clothes sounds very much like a lot of them that I've read. And that would have, you'd know you had the right guy because you know the name of the owner. So I think you could search on newspapers.com and search on, if you just do runaway, every now and then you get a horse, but mostly it'll be people, and the name of the owner is going to be in there, and that description of the clothing is very common too. So if they did broadsides, they probably put it in the newspaper as well.
Thank you. I am on newspapers.com, and the reference here, the Dixon Wechter reference, is of this recently advertised handbill. So I need to find those handbills. He describes it. There's not an actual reference to where this handbill is, but he is Dixon Wechter in 1961 was aware of its existence. So where should I'll look in the archives, but apart from that, newspapers.com. Do you have any other suggestions?
I mean, the handbill, if the author doesn't tell you where the handbill was seen, that's it, other than looking at where his other sources came from. If he mentions some other archives, then you could inquire of those archives. But otherwise, that's a needle in a haystack. I'd go straight to newspapers.com and see if you can, because you might find exactly the same text in an ad in a newspaper.
Okay. I think what I need to do is go to Howard County and go through some microfilm of newspapers and such in the county library. Thank you. That's helpful.
So, anybody else have any questions? I don't think we can let you get away, David, without telling us what happens now. So you're here doing the filming, you're doing your interviews, then what's the process?
Well, my goal is to finish production by the end of this calendar year. And so then we have post-production, which is editing. And so by the time we come back from October, from Springfield in October, we should have all of the live action footage that we need, apart from 3 or 4 sit-down interviews. So there are sort of different components. So right now I'm sort of focusing on what's right in front of me, which is our trip to Hannibal. So we're going to be spending 2 non-consecutive weeks in Hannibal. We have 4 interviews with Faye at New Philadelphia, in Quincy, and then with Terrell Dempsey. There are also events that we're going to film, like the National Tom Sawyer Days, the 4th of July celebrations, the Juneteenth celebrations, and there are certain locations that we're going to, and sites that we will also film. So that's the live action portion of it. We're creating a mock-up of the entire film. So what we're hoping to do is have really a mock-up, what we call a rough cut of the entire film by the end of the summer. And this is something that I'm a very impatient person, and I kind of dive into this because I believe in the story, and I'm willing to. I've been financing it, and it's been fine. But I've actually been able to do it, which I wasn't expecting to be possible. But once we have a mock-up and we can create teasers and trailers, we can use this to generate greater interest in the project. Now, I am intending to approach the actor Jeremy Renner about doing the voice of Mark Twain. And he lives in the local area, and he has connections to the university. His publicist arranged a meeting for him with the president of the university and the dean of the School of Journalism. and he's interested in creating some kind of film studies or some kind of professorship for himself. We are doing voiceover recording for this project in the Reynolds School of Journalism, and I've been communicating with the associate dean of the School of Journalism. And so when the time is right, I'm going to, through his publicist, contact him and approach him. So the way the system works, whether I like it or don't like it, is that if you have an actor or someone else with name recognition attached to the project, there is audience that's built into that. So if you were willing, or an alternative to Jeremy Renner, we're willing to, really, I'm going to ask him to do 1 day of voiceover narration where he could come into the Reynolds School of Journalism and record the voiceover as Twain. Or he also records music, so he has the equipment at his own house. He could potentially record it at home and send it as a sound file. And this is essentially realizing the vision that his publicist had for him in collaborating with the university on film projects, or basically giving it to them on a platter. So I intend to approach him. And so if he does agree to participate for at least 1 day, then that would make it much easier for us to get into major film festivals and for us to get a distributor. And of course, I believe in the story. First and foremost, the story is strong and is powerful and important. And it's about America. And that's really essentially why I'm interested in the story, is because as an artist, you're looking for something that's of larger significance than one's own self. And this story is as powerful and as significant and important as they come. And so I believe in it. I think people will be interested in it. And so that's the way forward. So we're taking it 1 step at a time. We're actually making pretty good pace. So I would anticipate we will finish editing and have the whole thing ready to release sometime next year.
Well, we're delighted that you are including New Philadelphia in the production and interviewing Gerald McWhorter. So we're very pleased with that. And of course, it's an important tie-in. So thank you for
absolutely
thinking of us, and thank you for joining us tonight. Does anyone else have any questions before?
I have one, just a quick one. Am I right that this is kind of a new approach to Mark Twain? I mean, there's been a lot written about Mark Twain, and I know Shelley's Fishkin has been writing about Mark Twain, but are you kind of the first one, or one of the first ones that's zeroing more on the real people behind the characters?
To my understanding, it's the most complete profile of the real Huckleberry Finn ever created. So I've taken all of the sources and I've collated them and combined them and written myself. And so to my understanding, it's the most comprehensive profile in existence. I hope I'm approaching it in a new and original way. He's the new Chernoff book. He's a good writer. The book about Hamilton inspired the production, but there's not a lot, my understanding from reading reviews, is he doesn't say very much that's new. I mean, it's been written about. So I hope it's a new approach, and I hope it's revealing and insightful. So to my understanding, it is the first time that anyone has really focused on the real individuals that were the basis for the character. That's characters. That's my understanding.
Great, thank you. Well,
us lovers of Mark Twain really appreciate you doing this.
Well, thank you. I'm hoping to create a work of art that changes the world for the better, and that's really what it's about. It's really about America.
Well, you're interviewing a lot of people and getting a lot of perspectives, so it should be a great film. We're looking forward to it. So
thank you.
If there aren't any questions, let's give David a big round of applause. So
okay.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder that we will be back here next Tuesday night for lecture number 3, which is Sarah Case from the Coalition of Sites of Conscience, and she's going to be talking talking about storytelling with difficult subjects, a difficult history. And there's a training course going on, and 3 of us with New Philadelphia are participating. So it should be a pretty interesting session as well. And so if there's nothing else, we'll just thank everybody for being here and see you next week. Oh, well, just a couple things going on. There is a presentation on Saturday, June 21st at the Berry Health and Senior Living by Gerald and Kate McWhorter, talking about New Philadelphia, the McWhorter family, and the Underground Railroad. So that should be interesting also for those of you who are local, 2 o'clock in Berry on June 21st.
And then the last likes lecture is going to be our Claire Martin.
Well, that's
too.
exactly right. Sorry, I didn't mean to not tell you all that. So Claire is going to talk on the 24th about the women of New Philadelphia, part 2, because she did it a few years ago, but it's an evolving story and learning more and more all the time. So that should be interesting too. I just saw something pop up in the chat. So, it's just a thank you from Angela saying very informative program. So good night, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Good luck with the film, David. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Take care. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.